was going on.
Amazing. You know, the Daily Mirror today, we say 67 times that the West came into contact with the authorities over 3 decades, and yet, of course, no one knew about all this, which seems implausible. It doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't make sense to a point, really. I mean, I think, Virginia, probably you can sort of fill us in there, having spoken to Anne-Marie, and you've known her now for 2 years, isn't it? You've actually been very close
very
to
nearly,
her.
yes,
Yeah.
more or less since the story first broke, and I met her, and we've had a long series of chats over the last 20 months or so. And really, it would appear that all of the West children were living under a reign of terror. Anne said to me on one occasion, if her stepmother, Rose, said to her, jump, she just said, how high? And she did as she was told. She was quite a shy child anyway. She didn't talk to anybody in authority because all of the children were told, you don't speak to people in authority, we'll keep you safe. The enemy were the doctors, the nurses, the health workers, the police. And so the children were told, don't talk to them, and they were too scared to do anything other than they had been told.
Howard, you've actually been researching your book, which is going to be all about Fred and Rose.
Yeah.
And looking into their background, I mean, we know now that they were abused as children in one way or another.
Sure.
Do you believe, from what you know about their childhood, that the way they were to become was an inevitability?
Well, they were two extraordinarily unhappy people with terrible backgrounds of their own. But, of course, the unique thing about the whole case is that these two people met and they fell in love. Now, if they hadn't met, none of this would have happened. Fred probably would have become arrested for some petty offence, might have ended up in a mental hospital or in prison, and Rose may have become nothing more harmful maybe than a prostitute.
So you believe it was a relationship between the two of them that definitely started all this off?
Oh, well, Fred was already killing, but of course he would have been found out. But of course Rose, the thing about the West is that Rose covered up for Fred, Fred covered up for Rose, and as a result they got away with it for years.
Very powerful programme last night, watching Anne-Marie telling the story, growing up in the West household. One of 3 girls in a picture there, and the only survivor out of the lot. How could all this be going on in the house and she not be aware of it? That's what people are asking.
Well, Anne-Marie ran away from home at 15 because of the situation at Cromwell Street. And she was sort of 10 years old when the majority of the murders were happening. She was a very frightened child.
But I mean, she was abused, first of all, at the age of 8.
At the age of 8 years old,
Then the age
right.
of 11, she's put on the streets as a prostitute. Then 13, she has a miscarriage, her father's baby.
She was slightly older. She was actually 15 when that happened, 15. Which is why she ran away from home. Right. Because, again, nobody listened to her. She was in hospital. She was 15 years old. She's pregnant by her father. She doesn't know what the authorities were told by Fred. She didn't even know she was pregnant at that time. But nobody in the hospital, no doctors, no nurses, took her to one side and spoke to her without Fred being present.
And the worst thing, of course, she certainly wouldn't have volunteered this information, because that was one of the most heartbreaking things, to sit and listen to her talking about being raped at the age of 8.
Absolutely.
And the damage physically and mentally it did to her, but that she was told, this is normal, this is what happens to little girls, it happens to your friends at school, they just don't talk about it, so you must never tell anyone.
That's right.
She believed that, and I think it was from the documentary that we watched last night. We've actually got a clip which was awful. Have a look at this now.
I'm not proud of what I've done. I suppose deep down, I don't believe my children will be proud of me. That's my one worst fear, is that my children won't respect me.
She's done nothing. It's
awful. Heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Anne-Marie is like the other people in this case. I mean, Anne-Marie is a tragic story, but there are many girls like Anne-Marie who we saw in court, many witnesses who have had a terrible, terrible experience. The West's abused countless people.
But Anne-Marie doesn't seem to abhor her father, as you think she should.
Well,
it's just that I suppose you don't do that to your parents, do you?
Well, I think, I mean, I've actually interviewed child psychologists about this very point, and they say it's not unusual for abused children to still have some kind of affection towards the abuser. You have to remember, this was the only kind of love and affection this woman ever knew as a child. And you look at her now, and it's a 31-year-old woman. Look at those pictures of her when she was 8 years old. Yeah. That's what was happening to her then. It was a father she had idolised for a very long time. She was his little girl. He had killed her mother. She thought she'd been abandoned by her mother. In comes the cruel stepmother. Dad is the only person left in her life. he treats her like this, and he tells her it's normal.
Yeah. I mean, as Howard said there, I mean, there are a great many people. You sat in on the court case right the way through.
Yeah,
and there are so many people sort of who have been affected, the families, by this. How do you think they are all going to rebuild their lives? I mean, Anne-Marie's doing a very, very good job.
I think they'd be very lucky to rebuild their lives. I think their lives have been marked forever, and their lives will be difficult for the rest of their lives. How can you possibly live with such things? You know, unbearable. Like being a victim, like being from a victim of the concentration camps. It's something you never possibly forget.
They were victims of Fred and Rose West, people were talking about. Anne-Marie was a victim all her life of Fred and Rose West. And one of the things you're talking about is the effect that's going to have in the future. One of the things that came out of the interview last night, and I'd like us to sort of finish on a little clip of Anne-Marie, and that was her, in a sense, she's not only been punished by those events, but she's been punished by us as well. Can I thank you both very much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you.
And let's leave the last word on this with Anne-Marie for today.
When I'm out with my children and I'm at town, the people are stopping and pointing at me, and I got my girls with me, and I think, can't you just stop and think how we're feeling? We've lost a lot of things. Yes, that was my dad, he done that. I admit, you know, we know that. But please try to give me a chance. I've lost my life. Since all this has come, I've lost my life. I'm getting to where I don't know who I am.